3:38 a.m. Persian Gulf, 29 nautical miles west of Abu Musa Island. 8 Iranian speedboats just departed from a shallow water coastal anchorage and moved onto an intercept bearing toward a U.S. Navy patrol ship. Not a destroyer, not a cruiser, a Cyclone-class coastal patrol craft, the USS Firebolt, operating alone in the Western Gulf on a counter-smuggling support mission. The Firebolt displaced 334 tons. The 8 Iranian boats it was looking at displaced approximately 13 tons each. The Firebolt had no helicopters of her own. She had one 25mm Mark 38 chain gun, 2.50 caliber mounts, and a crew of 28. U.S. helicopters were launching from a shore facility 34 nautical miles away. Welcome to Navy Strikeforce. Today, we're going inside the 124 minutes that followed that contact detection. 124 minutes in which the smallest commissioned warship in the U.S. Navy's Gulf inventory faced the largest IRGCN fast boat approach documented that year. A shore-based helicopter response that arrived 11 minutes after the boats reached engagement range, and a decision made by a junior commanding officer that became the subject of a formal tactical review conducted at 5th Fleet level. This is what it looks like when the Iranian fast boat threat targets not the most capable vessel available, but specifically the least capable one, and what the response to that targeting choice reveals about the gaps in American naval presence in the Gulf. The Cyclone-class patrol coastal ships are the U.S. Navy's smallest commissioned combat vessels. At 170 feet and 334 tons, the Firebolt is fast, capable of 35 knots, and maneuverable in shallow water that would ground a destroyer. She is armed well enough to conduct coastal patrol, intercept small watercraft, and support special operations. She is not designed to defend herself against a coordinated multi-vessel attack by fast attack craft. Her 25mm chain gun is effective against individual approaching boats at ranges out to approximately 2,000 meters. Against 8 boats approaching from multiple directions, the single-barrel weapon cannot provide coverage across the full threat-bearing spread without rotating, and rotation takes time that a 40-knot approaching speedboat does not provide. This is why the Firebolt was a target. Iranian fast boat doctrine, as analyzed in multiple after-action studies and Naval War College exercises, includes a specific category of operation against small U.S. naval vessels. The swarm approach against a vessel too small to carry defensive helicopters, operating in a sector too far from the nearest air support asset to receive helicopter coverage before the swarm reaches engagement range. The Firebolt, operating 34 nautical miles from the nearest shore-based helicopter detachment, in water too shallow for a destroyer escort, on a mission profile that placed her in the same general area at predictable times, represented exactly this target category. The 8 Iranian speedboats had been observed departing the coastal anchorage at 3:38 a.m. by a U.S. surveillance drone operating at medium altitude over the Western Gulf. The drone operator had flagged the departure as a potential threat based on the vessel's departure timing, 3:38 a.m., well outside normal commercial or fishing activity hours, and their initial heading, which intercept geometry immediately placed on a bearing toward the Firebolt's operating area. The contact report reached the Firebolt's commanding officer at 3:41 a.m., 3 minutes after the boats departed their anchorage. At their assessed speed of 38 knots, the boats were 29 nautical miles from the Firebolt's position, giving the patrol craft approximately 46 minutes before the range closed to engagement distance. 46 minutes. The commanding officer made his first transmission at 3:42 a.m., a request for immediate helicopter support directed to the shore-based MH-60S detachment at the forward operating base 34 nautical miles northwest. Transit time for the MH-60S at maximum speed, approximately 17 minutes. If the helicopters launched within the next 5 minutes, they would arrive on station approximately 28 minutes before the Iranian boats reached engagement range. 5 minutes to launch. The detachment's duty officer received the request at 3:43 a.m. The MH-60S crews were in their ready room, not in the cockpits, not at pre-mission brief, but in the building with their flight gear accessible. Standard shore-based alert posture for the Gulf detachment was a 15-minute launch window from ready room to wheels up. The request from the Firebolt was categorized as an immediate threat response, which authorized activation of an expedited launch procedure designed to compress the window to 8 minutes. The first MH-60S, callsign Cutlass 1, was airborne at 3:50 a.m., 7 minutes from the Firebolt's request. The expedited procedure had worked. The second MH-60S, Cutlass 2, was airborne at 3:53 a.m. Both helicopters were armed with the .50 caliber M2 door mount and carried AN/APS-153 surface search radar. They were not carrying anti-surface rockets on this sortie. The standard loadout for a counter-smuggling support mission profile did not include heavy anti-surface ordnance, and loading rockets under the expedited launch procedure would have added 12 minutes to the launch time that the Firebolt did not have. The absence of rockets was a constraint that would matter later. At 3:44 a.m., the Firebolt's commanding officer had two options he could execute immediately while waiting for helicopter support. He could increase speed and maneuver to maintain maximum distance from the approaching boats. Running southeast at the Firebolt's 35-knot maximum speed to buy time and potentially allow the helicopters to arrive before the engagement window opened. Or he could hold position and use the time to prepare a defensive configuration. Stations manned, ammunition loaded, firing arcs optimized for the approaching threat bearing. Running bought time, holding enabled preparation. He chose a combination, a speed increase to 25 knots on a course that opened the range at an angle rather than directly away. Not a flight, but a geometrical extension of the approach timeline, while simultaneously bringing the crew to general quarters and preparing all weapon systems for engagement. The 25-knot course alteration on an oblique bearing extended the approach timeline by approximately 8 minutes compared to a stationary hold. 8 minutes. At the far end of that 8 minutes, the helicopters would be 4 minutes from the engagement zone, rather than 12 minutes away. At 4:07 a.m., 26 minutes after initial contact, the Iranian boats were 9 nautical miles from the Firebolt, speed holding steady at 38 knots. Formation: a lead element of 3 boats on the direct approach bearing, 2 flanking elements of 2 and 3 boats respectively, spread approximately 2 nautical miles on either side of the lead axis. The flanking spread was the problem. The Firebolt's 25mm Mark 38 gun was positioned on the bow. At maximum traverse, it could cover a bearing arc of approximately 130 degrees forward, effective for anything approaching in the ship's forward hemisphere. But the flanking elements, positioned 2 nautical miles laterally and closing at 38 knots, would arrive at the Firebolt's beam from approximately 60 to 80 degrees off the bow arc, at the edge of the gun's effective traverse range, requiring the ship to maneuver to bring the weapon to bear while simultaneously trying to address the lead element. 1 gun, 3 threat axes, no helicopter yet. Cutlass 1 arrived on station at 4:07 a.m., exactly as the range to the lead element dropped to 9 nautical miles. The helicopter pilot's immediate assessment of the situation, transmitted to the Firebolt on tactical frequency, was direct. The flanking spread was too wide for the helicopters to cover with .50 caliber engagement without accepting significant exposure from the boat's own weapons. The MH-60S .50 caliber door mount is effective at ranges up to approximately 800 meters against small surface targets. To engage a boat in the flanking element, the helicopter would need to descend to below 400 feet and position within 800 meters of a boat that, if armed with shoulder-fired air defense missiles, could engage the helicopter before the helicopter could complete its firing run. Were the Iranian boats armed with man-pads? The surveillance drone had not identified weapons configurations clearly in the pre-dawn darkness. The answer was unknown. This is the decision the Cutlass 1 pilot was facing. He had a .50 caliber weapon effective at 800 meters. He had an unknown man-pads threat status on 8 approaching boats. And he had a 334-ton patrol craft below him that did not have enough weapons coverage to address 3 simultaneous approach axes without helicopter support. on at least one of the flanks. 3 options were available to the Cutlass-1 pilot at 4:09 a.m., with the lead Iranian element at 7.3 nautical miles, and the flanking elements closing fast. Option A: descend to engagement altitude and conduct an aggressive .50 caliber pass against the southern flanking element, accepting the man-pad's risk, with the goal of breaking the flanking approach before it reached engagement range of the Firebolt. Option B: hold above man-pad's effective altitude, approximately 3,000 feet, and use the helicopter's radar and FLIR to provide the Firebolt with continuous targeting updates on all 3 approach axes, functioning as an airborne sensor platform rather than a weapons platform, while the Firebolt's crew engaged with the ship's own guns. Option C: descend to 1,500 feet, below optimal man-pad's engagement altitude but above .50 caliber engagement range, and use the helicopter's presence and spotlight as a visual deterrent against the flanking element, attempting to break the approach through presence rather than fire. What would you order? Comment A, B, or C below. Because Cutlass-1 was already deciding, the pilot chose a modified version of option C. He descended to 1,200 feet, accepting a moderate man-pad's risk as preferable to either combat ineffectiveness at 3,000 feet or the higher man-pad's exposure below 800 feet, and activated both the helicopter's forward-facing searchlight and its tactical strobe system, creating a visually dramatic and unmistakably military presence directly over the southern flanking element's approach path. Simultaneously, Cutlass-2 descended to 1,800 feet and positioned over the lead element axis, providing sensor coverage and a secondary visual deterrent while maintaining a safer altitude profile. The southern flanking element reduced speed at 4:11 a.m., 3 boats dropping from 38 knots to 28 knots, maintaining bearing but losing the timing advantage that had made the multi-axis approach dangerous. The northern flanking element held speed for an additional 2 minutes before reducing. The lead element maintained 38 knots until 4:14 a.m., when it reduced to 30 knots. At 4:17 a.m., 36 minutes after initial contact detection, and 11 minutes after the range had first closed to engagement distance, the lead Iranian element altered course northeast, away from the Firebolt. The southern flanking element followed 90 seconds later. The northern flanking element held its bearing for an additional 3 minutes before altering. At one point during those 3 minutes, the northernmost boat in the flanking element closed to within 3,800 meters of the Firebolt, close enough that the ship's 25mm gun was tracking it. The gun did not fire. By 4:22 a.m., all 8 Iranian boats were on opening courses. The Firebolt had not fired a single round. Cutlass-1 and Cutlass-2 had not fired their weapons. The entire confrontation had been resolved by presence. 2 helicopters and 1 334-ton patrol craft. None of them firing, communicating through positioning and visibility what they would do if the Iranian boats continued closing. But the tactical review that followed was not a clean success story. The review identified several points at which the outcome had depended on factors that were not within the Firebolt's control or predictable in advance. The shore-based helicopter detachment had launched in 7 minutes, 8 minutes faster than standard alert posture required. If the launch had taken the standard 15 minutes, the helicopters would have arrived 8 minutes after the lead element reached engagement range, rather than simultaneously with it. During those 8 minutes, the Firebolt would have been addressing a 3-axis approach with a single 25mm gun and 2.50 caliber mounts against 8 boats. A weapons density problem that could not be solved with the organic armament available. The review also identified the man-pad's uncertainty as an unresolved operational risk. The decision to descend to 1,200 feet had worked because the Iranian boats had not fired. If they had been carrying shoulder-fired air defense missiles, Cutlass-1 at 1,200 feet was within the lower end of the engagement envelope of systems like the Igla or Mistral, systems that Iranian forces had access to in various configurations. The pilot had made a judgment call about man-pad's risk that had been correct in this instance. It was not a judgment that doctrine could validate, or a risk that pre-mission intelligence had resolved. The third finding was the most operationally significant. The Firebolt had been specifically targeted. The 8-boat approach had not been a random encounter. The departure timing, the approach bearing, the flanking geometry, all of it was consistent with a planned operation against a specific vessel type in a specific operating area during a specific patrol window. Someone had identified the Firebolt as a target, assessed her defensive limitations, and designed an approach to exploit them. And the approach had come within the accuracy of one helicopter pilot's altitude judgment and one detachment's 7-minute launch performance of succeeding. The operational changes that followed included revised presence requirements for Cyclone-class patrol operations in high-threat Gulf sectors. Specifically, a requirement that when Cyclone-class vessels operated more than 20 nautical miles from the nearest aviation support asset, a helicopter detachment must be pre-positioned at a forward base capable of providing a 10-minute response time, rather than the 17-minute transit time that had characterized this incident. The change required coordination with host nation partners and additional logistics support for forward helicopter operations. It was the right change. It came after 8 Iranian speedboats had demonstrated in the dark at 38 knots exactly why it was needed. Stay sharp, stay informed. This is Navy Strikeforce. We'll see you in the next one.